Hello there, Duranish Whiskey Lore, and time for another whiskey tasting. And today I am going with a whiskey that is one that came up in the championship round of our Whiskey Lore Craft Distillery of the Year competition last year, Liberty Pole Spirits. And we are going to be doing a tasting of the Old Monongahela Rye Full Proof version. And this is a very interesting whiskey because there's debate about what constitutes a Monongahela rye. I will tell you that my belief is that there probably is no set formula for it. Some people will say, well, they didn't use corn in it, and Maryland did use corn in it. What I'm telling you is that those old-time distillers would have distilled whatever they had available, whatever crop they were trying to save, and so there could be any number of things. In fact, there were no rules back then, so you might call something rye whiskey, but it may be more wheat than rye, or it might be more corn than rye. It's impossible to tell because so little was done in the way of records, and because there was no set rule for any of these things. But what I will say is that rye whiskey from the Monongahela region was very popular, and was popular before bourbon or even Kentucky whiskey was popular. In fact, in the early records that I see going back to the 1810s, in New Orleans, the first whiskeys that start showing up are rye whiskeys, and eventually Monongahela whiskeys, and I even see Monongahela rye listed in the early 1810s in Nashville, Tennessee, where they would have made their way down from Redstone Old Fort, which is just south of Pittsburgh, where they built the flatboats. It would have rowed down to the Ohio and then would have cut off and gone down the Cumberland River from there to get to Nashville. And so it's really one of the first named spirits, and in terms of a American whiskey, I will say, because at that time cognac was a name people understood, and Jamaican rum and things like that as well. So American spirits were a little late to the game in getting regional names, but Monongahela rye was definitely one of the early entrants. Now, Liberty Pole, that particular name, actually comes from a physical pole that has its history going well before the Whiskey Rebellion, but during the Whiskey Rebellion, David Bradford and the Mingo Creek Association would go around and they would plant these liberty poles, and they would put a flag atop them that had six stripes on it, red and white. And if you saw one of those, that was to let you know the protest against the tax and that there may be some danger in the area. If you were a revenue man at that point, you were probably in fear for your life, because there were attacks that were going on. A guy named Robert Johnson, actually, I talk about in my Whiskey Lore podcast episodes where I talk about the history of the Whiskey Rebellion, was the first victim, and he was tarred and feathered and basically left for dead out in the wilderness, and yet he continued on in his job, brave man as he was, and was attacked again. There were also incidents where they decided it was too unsafe for revenue men to actually be out going to farms, so they decided to put offices up, and one of the offices that was set up was shot up by bandits from the Mingo Creek Association as a warning that no revenue man will be given any station within somebody's tavern, or that tavern owner will pay. And the only way to get the Mingo Creek Association off your back was to write in the Pittsburgh Gazette that you were disowning the revenue. And one of the things that is misunderstood about the Whiskey Rebellion, because we always have to have this stupid soundbite history, which nothing about history is simple and can be explained in just a second, is that yes, it did start off with farmers who were not able to pay their taxes because Alexander Hamilton was lobbying taxes against them that were not only expensive, but also they couldn't pay because he required cash, and they were in a barter society, so they didn't have cash on hand, and so their stills were being stolen from them by the federal government to take that in lieu of the tax. And sometimes they would take farm animals, they would take crops, they would take... So this was really attacking the livelihood of these farmers, many of whom had gotten their land grants through military service. So it felt like a huge betrayal. But the part that history misses about that, including the fact that this was a cash issue, is that after a while, the Mingo Creek Association started pushing down on these farmers and basically said that if you give in to the revenue officers, we're coming after you. So they were really caught in the middle after a while, and they were then forced to, are you going to face the government punishment, or are you going to face the Mingo Creek punishment? And so it became a huge, huge mess. And of course, if you want to listen to the whole tale, you can go back and listen to, I think it's season 3 or season 4 of the Whiskey Lore podcast, where I retell the entire tale. And it's interesting. I just went to Pennsylvania not too long ago, and am going to be in a documentary on Pennsylvania whiskey and its history and its rise here in the modern era. And one of the questions I was asked was, can you tell us in a nutshell about the Whiskey Rebellion? And to my amazement, for the next 5 minutes, I pretty much rattled it off. And it was fun to do. But, you know, I had to cram for the test, I will be honest. I had to go back and listen to my own Whiskey Lore episodes to refresh my memory on certain parts of that historical event. Okay, so now you know a lot about the Whiskey Rebellion and some of the reasons why there would be a Liberty Pole. And so now let's talk about this particular spirit, which is one that I've had for a while and I've wanted to do a review on, but I've been holding off on doing reviews for some time. 54% ABV for this particular whiskey, goes in at a low proof point, which is something I'll talk about somewhere in the future on another tasting. This has wheat in it, which is, again, an interesting ingredient because farmers would have used whatever they would have used back then. And so, you know, it's possible that they were using wheat. It was possible they were using corn, any number of things. You're preserving crops. How are you going to do that? But over time, it's gotten to be the belief that Monongahela rye was just rye grain, which is not necessarily true. Okay, so the percentages on this are, it is 74% rye, 13% wheat, 13% malted barley. All right, let's do a nosing and tasting on this. And what I find interesting about this particular whiskey, I always try to figure out what is it about this in terms of the rye grain, because rye is usually very expressive and can be very different from place to place. I get a lot of lemon on this, and I actually get a bit of a sweet tea note to this particular whiskey. The rye is also a bit vegetal and earthy as well to me. There's also a little bit of like a, I want to call it like a pencil shaving kind of a note in there. Just kind of a fresh wood kind of a note that I get in it. In my notes, I actually put that I got spaghetti. I don't know what spaghetti smells like. But somehow it's just, when I do my notes, I just throw down whatever first comes to mind, you know, and then I'll sort the details out later. A little lemon pie though. Little lemon pie on that. Cheers. Yeah. Lemon pie continues actually on the palate. Little smoky character, and then a nice herbal note kicks in towards the end. Some char in there, and then it dries out as it gets to the finish. Very pleasant, probably a bit more herbally and dry on the finish than you might expect when you're doing the nosing at the beginning. It's got a medium mouth feel to it. There is no filtering to this, as I understand. It's distilled through a pot still, which is going to make it a little different from most Kentucky ryes that you might find. Just a very interesting spirit. And another expression, if you're in the mood for a sweeter rye, you're probably going to edge towards the Sazerac. If you want something with a little bit more of a dry character to it and that herbally note, then I think this fits in. And if you're big into getting that sweet tea again, actually, here on the finish, if you're big into kind of that lemon citrus note, then I think this whiskey will fit the bill for you. Hope you enjoyed this. Leave your comments below if you like to, and go ahead and check out the Whiskey Flight also at whiskey-lore.com/flights, and look for the actually, you know, that was before I started doing my Great 48 tour of the U.S., so it's going to be a few episodes back. But you can also go to whiskey-lore.com/Pennsylvania, and you will find all of the Pennsylvania distilleries out there that I have found so far that do whiskey and some kind of interactive event, whether a tasting room or tours. And until next time, cheers and Slanjapa.